Hello and welcome to Protocol's workplace event on building a hybrid culture. I'm Tammy Wincup, president of Protocol, and as always, I truly appreciate you joining us. Before we get started, I wanted to be sure you also knew about two additional workplace events we have coming up here at Protocol. In 2 weeks, we will host a virtual event on the new federal vaccine mandate that President Biden announced just last week. And then in October, our virtual event will focus on new benefits we see emerging in the tech workplace. I hope you will join us for both of those as well. But today we're focused squarely on the topic of hybrid work. For many organizations, the idea of a hybrid work culture with team members on different schedules and in different locations predates the pandemic. For others, it's been a brave new journey. Today, every company is grappling with how to institutionalize hybrid work and build a culture that supports your goals. We have a great conversation ahead, including a superb panel moderated by my colleague, Protocol Workplace reporter Allison Levitsky. And we have the perfect partner in Trello to help set the stage for today's hybrid culture discussion. Michael Pryor, who's joining us, works for Atlassian as the head of Trello, the visual collaboration tool that gives millions of people around the world perspective on their projects. Michael is also a co-founder of Fog Creek Software and sits on the board of Stack Exchange. And as importantly for today's conversation, Michael has been a champion for hybrid work since co-founding Trello. Welcome, Michael. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Tammy. It's great to be here.
To see you. Good. Well, let's dive in. Trello has embraced hybrid work long before the pandemic. What drove that? How did you get started in that work?
Yeah, I think probably like most companies, we had somebody that was working for us, an engineer who had to move. His spouse got a job in Hawaii as a doctor. And he said, "Hey, sorry, I have to go." And we said, "Well, wait, why don't you just keep working for us and you can work from there?" And once we dipped our toe in the water, things started to snowball. We got to a point where we wanted to hire some senior people in the organization, and I had my eye on two people. One was in Chicago for our head of marketing. She lived in Chicago, and our head of sales for Trello lived pretty far outside the city, about 2.5 hours outside the city. But they were the right people for the job, and we already had a couple of remote employees, and kind of took the plunge and just started putting job postings up for remote workers. And we had an office in New York that people would come into, but slowly over time, as we put those job postings up and got just tons of resumes coming in from all over the United States, the percentage of people that were working remotely for Trello just kept creeping up and up and up.
So that was 10 years ago. You're about to celebrate your 10-year anniversary.
Yep.
What has changed the most? What's evolved in your culture as a result of that? And how has it impacted everything from products to kind of who you are in the marketplace?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it seems kind of quaint now to think back about what was changing slowly over time before the pandemic and then thinking about how much has changed since the pandemic started and we all shifted to at least for Atlassian overall, to remote work 100%. In the early days, there were simple things like we would go into a conference room and we have one person dialed in on the video screen, and we started to realize, hey, this isn't fair for that one person. We're having an in-person meeting. They feel out of the loop. Why don't we all just go back to our desks and dial into the meeting at the same time? Things that kind of have to happen naturally now that we're all distributed, but we had to be really intentional about those things early on. Another thing is we spend a lot of time thinking about the types of activities that would happen in the office that stopped happening when people were remote, the meta of how you form relationships with your coworkers, the conversations that would happen at the coffee bar or, over lunch. Like, how do we recreate those in a digital space? And I think also, as we were learning all of those things over the years, we were also building our product to help us do work more asynchronously. For example, we were trying to figure out, how do we move work forward when people aren't all in the same place at the same time? And little by little, Trello and our team, we were sort of eating our own dog food, building this product, trying to figure out like how can how can we build a team and a company that can work remotely most of the time. Sometimes we were coming together once a year. We would have a big event called Trello Together. We'd get everyone into the same place at the same time to just actually not do work, to just hang out and form the relationships that we had. But I think thinking about all those extra things in addition to work, there's the specifics of work, but there's also the relationships that you build with other people and what really makes you a team together. I think those are the things that have changed the most over the last couple of years and how we do that.
And there's pieces within the product or within that you kind of, the tactical pieces, I think is what people are grappling with right now, right? Which is, theoretically on the global scale, they're saying, hey, these are goals we have for it, but how does it actually operationalize itself? So what does your asynchronous versus synchronous kind of communication look like?
Yeah. Well, it's just sort of interesting because I think on the surface, it's very obvious that you need different tools like, Zoom or Microsoft Teams to communicate with people. You need tools to move work forward. We obviously use Trello a bunch. We use Jira. We use Confluence to do that at Atlassian. That moving work forward is kind of the obvious thing when you're trying to work remotely. But I also think thinking about what people are doing in their homes, how you're onboarding new people, like what's the experience that new people have, and also how are people able to relate to each other through their tools. So I think like it used to be 10 years ago, the bar for software was like, can we work collaboratively? Can we do these things in a remote way? And now the bar is, how do we do them with the personality of teams, the emotion of teams? How do we communicate? You go back to, inventing emoji reactions, for example, which is a simple, like, why did that come about? It's because people were communicating in these text mediums. They need a richer way to communicate. That permeates through all the tools that we're using. You see that through simple features like we added board backgrounds in Trello, or we added card covers so people could decorate their boards. And there's a sense of belonging there, right? Essentially, if we're working virtually all day long in these digital offices, we have to think about how people are actually expressing themselves and their personality through these tools too. So I think that's something that we're all learning about.
A huge piece of culture, right? And in terms of how you actually bring your relationships and yourself to work. So with the asynchronous communication, I think it's important to also say, well, how does Trello spend your time when you actually are together then? It's such a precious time when folks do come together in a hybrid work environment. What do you spend time on? What do you focus on?
We very early on, we did something a little bit different where we would say like, hey, when we would have a new person join the team, for example, they used to come into New York to the headquarters essentially, and we'd have the whole team come in, not just that person, but the whole team. Like if it was a new support person, the whole support team would come in. And we actually just said, just don't do work, like hang out, like go do escape the room things, go to lunch in New York, just spend time together as a team. And it's all that like non-work, those memories, the relationships, all those things that you have to rely on when you're apart. It's all that relationship building. So when we would do our event Trello Together and we would actually get everyone together, we would go to some resort. We went to Puerto Rico, we went to a lake in Georgia, and we would just spend the week like, water skiing and swimming and hanging out by the pool. And it was a little bit of a vacation, but actually I think it was super important to building the culture and the team morale that we needed in order to carry us through the rest of the year. So I think it's a little bit counterintuitive, but a lot of times when you are together, it's actually a really important time to spend that building the relationships that support your work, not necessarily the work itself.
Absolutely. Well, a huge important piece for us to remember that, the hybrid work is not just about what we do asynchronous, but what we spend time on when we are actually together. And Michael, thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your leadership on this. And thanks for setting the stage for our continued conversation on hybrid work. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Tammy.
Absolutely. I'll now turn it over to my fabulous colleague, Allison, and her panel where we continue the conversation Michael started.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Really excited for this panel. We've been covering how tech companies are trying to get back to the office and how they're going to manage a hybrid workforce with more remote workers and many employees splitting their time between working from home and working from the office. It's clear just based on the level of interest in this panel that these issues are top of mind for many employers. So I wanted to talk to some experts about how tech companies need to think and act differently in order to promote an inclusive culture in this new world of hybrid work, as well as some of the tools and practices that are going to become essential as companies make this transition. So we have a great panel today. I'm going to kick it over to them for introductions. And why don't we go alphabetically, starting with Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Christie, and really excited to be here. I lead the people team and the real estate and workplace team at Twitter.
And then Naomi, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. I'm a partner at Menlo Ventures. We're a multi-stage firm. We focus on investments from seed to growth across sectors like SaaS, robotics, healthcare, fintech, consumer, etc.
And lastly, we have Sheila.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sheila Subramanian. I am the Vice President of the Future Forum, which is a consortium backed by Slack focused on the future of work. Thank you for having us today.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. Really excited about this conversation. I'd like to first ask a question of all of our panelists. Are you currently or will you soon be managing a hybrid team? We can start with Sheila.
Yes, so I am, and I will continue to grow my hybrid team. At Slack, we are focused on being digital first. So I am hiring a team around the world. I'm looking for talent that's really excited to be part of the organization and not necessarily considering location of potential candidates. And this has been really important for us as an organization to set the model for what digital first can look like and also build a more equitable environment.
Great. And Naomi, what about you?
We are, as a firm, we're all co-located in the US, but the way that we invest has totally changed, where building that rapport in person was part of that organic relationship development. We're just doing more and more investing remotely, and a massive trend with our company, them building fully remote teams. So even historically, where they would have one main headquarters or center of gravity and then do a subset of remote hiring, predominantly in engineering, now we're seeing just remote first as the model.
And then Jennifer, I think I know the answer for you, but what does your team look like at Twitter right now?
Yeah, so as you know, we've been working on this for a few years now in terms of becoming more distributed, so more locations, decentralized location-wise, but also building more muscle around remote work and building a larger remote workforce within Twitter. And so that's something we've been on. COVID obviously accelerated that tremendously when we all went to work from home. So coming out of it, still undetermined exactly when that's going to be, but when we start coming back into offices, most of our employees want to split their time between the office and home. So yeah, we will definitely be both distributed across lots of locations, but also splitting our time between offices and home.
Great. So we're all living this. Sheila, your team has done a lot of research on hybrid work over the last year. So I think you're very familiar with a lot of the hurdles that companies are facing across sectors when it comes to building culture in a hybrid environment. Can you talk a little bit about what those hurdles are?
Sure. So I can tell you a bit more about what employees want to start. Based on our research from the Future Forum, 76% of employees want flexibility in when they work, but 76% want flexibility in where they work, and 93% want flexibility in when they work. So it's not just about the number of days that people are coming into the office. It's about how leaders are going to completely rethink how work operates post-pandemic. So what we have done a lot of is work with executive members within the Future Forum to figure out what's the best way to implement hybrid work model successfully. So what we've landed on is it's really important for leaders to set principles on an executive level of what they're looking to embody as an organization. A principle, as an example, that we're trying at Slack is that we're going to take a growth experimental mindset. And along with those principles, it's also what are the guardrails you're looking to implement. So an example of that is if one person dials in, everybody needs to dial in. So that one person who's not in the conference room doesn't feel left out. Another interesting idea that we've experimented a little bit with is core team work hours. So working between the hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and embodying the nonlinear workday. And the last piece are the principles that leadership need to set from their own behavior. So at Slack, we have hired a distributed executive team. So it's not that all the executives are coming into the office 5 days a week and working from 8 to 6, and everybody else feels like they need to follow. It's that leadership is also thinking about their own behavior and the tone they're setting from the top. And all three of these areas, the principles, the guardrails, and the leadership behavior, is going to be super important because this great experiment that we're currently experiencing has the risk of becoming very inequitable if people aren't necessarily following a structure when they're implementing it.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, on the piece about leadership behavior, what is Twitter doing on that front? Are Twitter's executives committing to limiting their time in the office, or what does that look like at Twitter?
Yeah, so we do also have a distributed leadership team, which was something, again, we started working on right up front because we knew if we kept that center of gravity where all the decisions were being made and all the leaders were showing up, it'd be very hard to move us forward from a culture's perspective. So definitely everything that Sheila said about leadership, very important. We're partnering actually with UC Berkeley's Superhuman Lab, a lot of training around the science of prioritization and hybrid leadership and things like that. They've done a lot of work on training, so we think that's important too to get everyone on the same page. But I would say we've taken it down even farther into the org at the manager level, because for us, that's really where the rubber hits the road. Managers' own capability and comfort level and managing a distributed team and their capability of doing that really matters because they're the decision makers in all of this. So definitely leadership at the top, but we've really leaned into the frontline managers and making sure that it just doesn't depend on which manager you have if you get to have the flexibility and choice. And if you're led the right way, we want everyone, no matter which manager, that you have to have that. And it's about leaning into empowerment and trust. We had a lot in the very beginning, we had a lot of managers that felt like they needed to eyeball their employees all day to make sure they were getting something done. And we had to say, listen, hire the right people and empower them. Let them know what they need to be working on, but let them go about doing it in the way that they are most productive, to Sheila's point about when they want to work, what makes sense for them. And that was hard for some managers to wrap their head around because they just felt like, I'm not going to know what they're doing. And I'm somebody that doesn't believe that people become different humans when they go home. If you're a hard worker, you're probably going to work twice as hard at home. And if you're somebody who's going to slack off, then you're probably going to do that in the office too. So just hire the right people and empower and trust them is something we've really leaned into.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as some of the best practices around just communicating those expectations for when to come into the office, how often to come into the office? What should companies be thinking about on that front?
So what we're doing, and I think we're still learning what best practices are, but what we're trying and testing and learning around is, first of all, team agreements is something that we've established. So a manager will work with their team to make sure they understand everyone's preferences around work and use that to help drive team scheduling and planning. So just as a very practical matter. But then also more broadly around goal setting, making sure that people are setting goals in a way that do empower people and give people enough guidance on what they should be working on and when they need to hit certain milestones. And then we have monthly, we've been having, everyone's remote, monthly check-ins that people log, and it's twofold. How are people tracking against their goals, but also how are they doing? Because right now wellness and how people are doing and under these conditions is top of mind for us. Their safety and mental health and all of that. And we just want managers, again, on the front lines to really have their hand on the pulse of how their folks are doing. So we're requiring the monthly check-ins of just how are you tracking with goals, and is there anything I can help you with, unblock, help, and then also how are you doing? Making sure they're having both of those conversations on a regular basis.
Naomi, are you seeing any tech solutions emerge around any of this, around kind of these communicating expectations or, setting up these check-ins and anything on that front?
100%. I'm nodding along. And I think there are a few points here I'd love to touch on from the early stage investing angle. Looking at what is that new fabric under which we all work. And it's not just the productivity piece and collaboration and those shared workflows. It's this human aspect of how we all connect, how we all know each other as colleagues and feel this connection to the organization. I think we all miss the serendipitous water cooler conversation, and we've been pushed to this formality of, in Zoom rectangles on the screen and our eyes kind of darting around as we're trying to just kind of work together and live in all these different tools, and the proliferation of SaaS has only made that more head spinning, right? So in looking at the tools that kind of marry productivity and collaboration and make sure that in this virtual world we can actually get stuff done, but how do we feel like a team again? And so I've been spending a ton of time looking at investments in that capacity. One led to my investment in this company called TeamFlow that integrates the video experience within a shared workspace so that we're not just kind of in Zoom over here and then in a bunch of different tools over here. We're all in the shared collaborative experience so that we can talk to each other and it feels human, it feels intimate again. It feels like we're all at a whiteboard together like we had in the office experience. And so what are these tools that feel just as much of like a high utility product as one that makes you feel like a team again? And that was one that I think that UX really nailed. And part of the benefit in these tools too is kind of that virtual office of just feeling each other's presence, just knowing that other people are online and available. We miss kind of just doing that drive-by and tapping someone on the shoulder to have that quick conversation, that transfer of knowledge, that just telling, a story about something that happened over the weekend. And now we're all shoved into the formality of reaching out to an EA or getting on someone's calendar and kind of finding that 20-minute free block that somebody's available. Versus having something that's a more just sort of natural interaction. So that's one, just in how we all stay connected and kind of feel the presence of each other. But a few other points around like the meeting experience. I spend a lot of time thinking about the pre, during, and post meeting and how now in a virtual world, there's a huge opportunity for passive data collection. Like you can do things like sentiment analysis. You can do transcription and put natural language processing on to understand what are some next steps and the task management that comes out of a meeting? Who spoke the most? Are we including everybody? Is this an inclusive meeting? So there's so much tooling around that meeting experience that in a virtual world, I think we actually get more data and can help people be more productive and more inclusive than ever before. So trying to lean into some of those benefits in this virtual world, knowing that we don't have the benefit of all being side by side.
Yeah, and I did get to demo TeamFlow with you, which was really interesting. It was kind of like a little bit like playing The Sims in an office and everybody's on camera. I mean, that sense of presence and being able to tap someone on the shoulder. I mean, messaging tools like Slack kind of fill in the gap. What do you see as kind of that last mile between Slack and something like TeamFlow, where it's a virtual office experience and everybody's on video all day?
Yeah, I think now more than ever with just the number of channels, the number of tools, I mean, going back to that proliferation of SaaS and the rise of self-serve and product-led growth, where any individual IC can just kind of collect the tools that they want to use to get the job done. And so we all have our own Frankenstein patchwork quilt of tools that we bring to work individually, and then things that get sort of pushed out or tried across various layers in the organization. So I would argue there's still this need to kind of up-level what's the most important thing I need to do right now. And so it's more of this level of prioritization than necessarily needing a new job, tool for a certain job to be done. It's how do I just kind of make sense of the noise and pop up a level so I can focus on number one thing on my list.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how do you balance using all of these tools while also, being able to focus? That seems like kind of one of several paradoxes of hybrid work. Jennifer, I'm curious how Twitter handles this.
Well, I think it's something we're still working out. And because I will say, to Naomi's point, we are finding people are spending more time in meetings than they normally would, because especially because remote has gone on for so long, people really miss that connection, and they are, they'd rather join a meeting that they might not really need to join, just so they can see other people and hear what's going on and not want to miss anything. It's like FOMO. We're trying to beat the FOMO back a little bit, but we're working with them on some of the trainings around calendar cleanse and this training on the science of prioritization, to Naomi's point, like really focusing on what you really need to think about today, not trying to do it all, not trying to show up in everything that's going on, but really focus and being really present when you do show up, and leaning into the things that you can have the biggest impact on, because that'll, get people seeing you, and you'll feel seen, and you'll also feel more productive than trying to manage 5,000 different things. And so we're trying to give each other that space to really do that as well, but giving them some tools on how to do it. And Naomi, I'm going to follow up with you on some of the tools you mentioned, because those are definitely pain points that we're looking to address.
And it's a balance too of what makes an individual employee feel like I have superpowers with this tool. This
Yes.
makes my day easier. This makes my day better. I'm at my best using this tool, versus big brother's watching me, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a blanket coming from above and sort of monitoring my every move. And so it is a fine line to understand what sort of wins over the hearts and minds of individual employees, but also benefits management. And so I'm constantly thinking about that push and pull.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sheila, as you do research on hybrid work, are you finding any tensions here between kind of staying connected with all of these different tools, and also, needing to kind of focus and put your head down?
Yeah, so there's a couple of areas there that I'd love to touch on. The first is what we're seeing from the research is that leaders and organizations who are innovators and early adopters of technology see a higher sense of belonging, as well as higher productivity within their organization. So investing in new tools is not just a way to get people to work more, it's also a very great way for people to feel like they're connected to one another. And so it's really important for leaders to take that on as a responsibility to constantly evaluate what your tech stack looks like, and also what are the gaps within your organization. To the point about doing focused work, I love Dropbox's model of evaluating meetings. They have a model called the 3Ds. A meeting should be intended to debate, discuss, or decide. And if it's not one of those three, you should cancel it and move it to a digital channel. There's also the opportunity to use meetings to drive that social connection. At Slack, we use a tool called Donut, and it randomly pairs you with people within the organization to have a coffee chat. So I had one yesterday. There's no agenda, never met the person before, but we had a chance to better understand what one another does, where we live, the person's new dog. There was a lot of fun conversation over that 30 minutes, and I left the day feeling like I had made a new friend within the company. And the last piece is I cannot underscore enough the need for leaders to set the tone for focus time. Because what we saw early in the pandemic was that people were working from 8:30 to 6 p.m. on Zoom, and then they were taking care of their families in the middle of it, and then doing focus work at night. That's the recipe for burnout. And so it's critical for leaders to set maker time within their teams at the high level, and do that on a regular basis. And leaders need to also model that behavior, that they're spending that time doing focus time. So those are the three areas that we've been studying a lot within the Future Forum.
Hey, Allison, can I add something to that? Is that okay?
Yeah.
It's funny that you talked about Dropbox. We've set some guidelines as well for meetings. We kind of say async first. It's Twitter AF, so Twitter async first. So that should be your default. We're trying to build that as a default muscle versus everyone having to do anything in person, and set some guidelines. For us, it's decisions, it's debates, it's development. That's one of our Ds. And then social is another. So we have 4. But we want to make sure that people, if they're getting feedback, if they're having development coaching, that's done live as much as possible as well. And we've also established what we call perch time. A lot of bird references to Twitter, so perch on a branch, I guess. So perch time is everyone has to build in at least 2-hour-long blocks of perch time a day within the normal work hours. So it kind of forces people to say, like, when can I do that? And they cancel meetings and say, like, I have to cancel this. I can't attend this. I'm on my perch time. And it's kind of like normalizes that what you meant about focus time. And we have focus weeks too, that we all organizations establish focus weeks where you're not allowed to have any meetings. The only meetings that you're allowed to do are interviews, because we're still growing as a company. So we need to keep that pipeline going. But other than that, everything needs to be async. And it's really meant to allow people to focus and not be in meetings. But again, it kind of normalizes that when everybody does it versus one person trying to beg and plead for some time to think.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Async is just such an interesting approach, and love to hear more about how that works at Twitter, and especially I think when it comes to building culture and creating connectivity. I mean, what are kind of the key strategies when it comes to making sure that people are still talking to each other when you're also trying to keep things async first?
Well, I think that in some ways async has helped us to connect more, because we're a global distributed team. And, it used to be that you were just having those connections with people that you'd walk by or you worked in the same location with. And now we use Slack very much in a very social way. We get work done through Slack, but we also use Slack for fun. There's a lot of play that you can do within Slack. We have different Slack channels for connecting people across things that are interesting to them. So we've got one for people who love cats and, pretty much cooking or anything that people like. So we're connecting communities across the globe, and they're connecting asynchronously, right? So you can, in one part of the globe, if you're, on a channel and a thread, you can chime in on it and then go to sleep, and someone else picks it up. Another part of the world and chimes in, and then you can read what they've said later. It's so much easier to do that than like through email and some other tools that we were using before. And so, that's been part of it too. And then for us, it's just knowing what our cultural anchors were kind of before COVID, and trying to, before we all went remote. And trying to continue to live through some of those. Like we always were doing one team meetings. So every month we bring the whole company together for 2 hours to, updates and all of that. And it used to be streamed from our San Francisco office. And, the people who weren't in San Francisco didn't have a great experience on it. They would kind of sometimes just watch the recording, but it wasn't as much of an engaging thing. Now it's really a level playing field. Everyone can be on the screen at the same time. We switch time zones, so everyone can at least every other month can have a time zone that works for them to really participate live. We have Slack going the whole time. People are asking questions in Slack. That leadership, we take a bunch of Q&A time to answer questions live and answer them in Slack. Whereas before, it was only the people who got to the mic who were asking questions, and not everyone wants to go to the mic, but people are very fine putting questions in the Slack channel, and then it's very transparent of what questions are being asked, and people can't cherry pick what they want to answer and what they don't want to answer. So it's just much more engaging. They're cheering on colleagues during the session, when they're presenting. And then the other one is Hack Week. Twitter was born out of a Hack Week at another company. And so we've been running those, and that's actually been also really fantastic asynchronously, because now we have global teams working on issues together, and they're able to work like this around the globe, follow the sun with the different tools we're using, versus it used to be just you would do it with the people in the same office as you, and almost like a science fair. But now it's opened it up to these global teams innovating and collaborating together. And it's a very core to our culture to do these Hack Weeks. And now we can do it in a very more distributed and more engaging way. So there's lots of challenges to asynchronous, that I think we've talked about, but in some things that we've done, they're better than they used to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Looks like we lost Sheila, but I think she's coming back. Looks like we have a question.
Part of the remote world we're all in, right?
Right,
Hasn't had these technical difficulties. I'm personally on my iPhone right now because I'm having an internet outage at home. So we've all been there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we may be on the same internet outage because my internet just went out and I'm tethered to my phone. So I apologize for missing the question.
All good. Glad you're back. We have a question from Adam who posted on YouTube for everybody. Do you have any advice for those of us who've started at a new company during the pandemic and have still only worked virtually with our new team? Maybe we can start with Naomi.
Yeah, I love this question because hiring is at such a high clip right now. I think we've all seen the stats about the percent of people that are willing to leave their job and move somewhere else. So I think it's a war for talent. So this is something that if companies aren't thinking about, they need to start yesterday. I always did a listening tour when I was new, and just really like making sure that I not only met the people in my direct team and had that immediate understanding of tools, process, strategy, but who are the people that I should be meeting across the organization? So initially just really mapping out the org and making sure that you're getting those connection points to people that, will help you get your work done broadly. So kind of a 360 view of the company. But taking that extra time to schedule all those calls, going through that extra effort of attending those meetings and attending those events and putting faces to names. I think the nice thing about this world is like you can really be intentional about it. And so I think intention is a key word that we keep going back to at the firm with how you spend your day and the way you're interacting with people. Instead of just getting the benefit of kind of walking by someone in the office, it's setting that agenda and coming with your key questions and not just getting to know them as people, but how you can just accelerate the ramp at the company. So I would really just overload your calendar on getting to know as many people as possible, but sort of cherry picking based on how you can ramp the fastest and really, be this new employee that's having impact right away.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think, Sheila?
Yeah, and I'll give my perspective from a manager or leadership level. So early in my career, or even a few years ago at Slack, when I had a new member join my team, I would have them do a starter project. And that was usually work related. It was a way for them to get their feet wet and ramp up pretty quickly and better understand the workings of the organization. Now, when I have a new member of my team, their first project is to create a personal operating manual. It's essentially a document where you talk a bit more about yourself, your background, what are your motivators, as well as what do you find discouraging. And we spend about an hour in those first few weeks talking through that so that I, as a leader, can better understand the inner workings of the person on my team, but then they also better understand how I operate. One thing that I have in my operating manual is I'm a mom of 2 young kids. And so I'll oftentimes work really early mornings or really late nights, but there's no expectation to respond during those times. It's just the hours that I work. And so having those conversations up front are a great way to get to know the person, the life behind the person, rather than just asking them to do the work. And we found that to be a very successful onboarding vehicle as we ramp up new people virtually.
Wow, that's awesome. And how about you, Jennifer? Do you have any advice for people who've started at a new job and still only work virtually with their new team?
Yeah, no, for sure. And, we've been hiring like mad, even all through 2020 and now. So at this point, almost half of the people at Twitter have only ever been virtual. And so it's something that we definitely think about. And I love the way that Naomi and Sheila answered the question, because it is important to think about it from an employee's point of view, but it's also what is a company going to do to set these people up for success? And so it has to be both. It shouldn't just rest on the new person who's joining to navigate, although they do need to do their work. But the company should be thinking a lot about how to set the stage by the right onboarding programs and, giving the people the right exposure. And what I would say, advice I would give is make sure that during the candidate process, you're asking those questions as you're evaluating, because it's a buyer's market right now for employees. And so when you're in the interview process, how am I going to be onboarded? How are you going to make sure that I'm included in things that are going on in the company? How am I going to learn how to operate? How am I going to build relationships? What's the way that people build relationships at this company? And how does that work? Those are really important questions to ask right now, because most people are going to be joining companies that are going to be virtual for a while, and it's a very worthy area to explore. The one area I would add is finding those things that are going on in the company that are cultural connectors. For us, again, it's those Slack channels, and it is one of those big areas. And so someone can get a real presence for themselves by being very participative in those Slack channels and showing up and commenting and things like that. And people start seeing that person's name. And then they can make those other connections like offline to say like, hey, I think we're both interested in some of these things, or I want to pick up that conversation and take that offline. Are you okay for to set up time to chat? So just a different way to expand that network beyond like the work aspects of it. But yeah, I think it's something people should explore and press on companies as they're making those choices of where to join.
Yeah. I want to make sure we spend some time talking about proximity bias, which I think is something a lot of companies are thinking about, how to make sure that people who do come to the office more often don't get more access to opportunities, time with leadership, potentially promotions than people who are working remotely. And this can have implications, of course, for people from different backgrounds, people who may have children to take care of at home, et cetera. So it's a big topic, but Sheila, what are you thinking about on this front? What do you think that companies should keep in mind in order to kind of build those safeguards against proximity bias?
Yeah, it's something I think about every day because it's something I'm worried about. And based on our research, what we see is that working mothers, as well as employees of color, are the ones who want flexible work lives. And if all the executives go back into the office, we're going to see some inequities created. So similar to what I said earlier, it's really important for leaders to think about equitable experiences when they're designing their guardrails and their principles within their organization. So it can't just be about the number of days that people are coming into the office. It's really thinking about what are the practices, to Jennifer's point, that managers are trained on, what are the practices that executives are modeling, and how do we also keep ourselves in check and review how things are going on a regular basis. Because a recipe for failure is setting a policy and only reviewing it on a quarterly basis. You need to get real-time feedback from your employees across the organization, across different locations, to find out what's working and what's not, and iterate and adjust accordingly. So it's all about intentionality, to Naomi's point earlier, and this is a core part of a leader's job moving forward.
Yeah. What are you thinking about, Jennifer, as Twitter starts its transition into hybrid?
Yeah, so it's definitely, we talked a little bit already about leveling the playing field, people who are at home versus people who are in an office. And we actually have the posters already up in the offices because we opened for 2 weeks before we shut back down again. But in our conference rooms, we have instructions about, it's called one tweet, one screen. Our people are called tweets. One tweet, one screen. So when you go into a conference room, we actually don't have people pulling up the big conference screen. It's everyone's just using their laptop like they would do at home, and tapping into the audio in the room. So everyone still has the same like kind of grid view, versus you see like 10 people in a room and they're teeny and you can't really tell who's talking and all of that. So that's one piece, more practical, tactical. But on a broader level, what Sheila was saying about how do you measure going forward, we do two surveys a year that we're tracking things across all our demographics in terms of people's experience, feeling included, feeling seen, productive, all the different aspects of an experience working. We're going to start cutting that by, are you working remotely? Are you splitting your time? Are you at an office location, or that kind of thing? Also, demographics around women and our different, our Black, our Latinx, Asian populations, to see like, is their experience different? We also do annual promo reviews and annual pay equity reviews. We're going to cut this as well by, are you splitting your time in the office at home? Are you working fully, remotely at home? And see if that's having an impact on people's career progression, their ability to get promoted, or even their pay. We just want to make sure that we're going to catch those things if things start happening that are really impacting people's careers. We're going to get a handle on it, but by measuring some of the things that we already do, but cutting the data in a broader way.
Mm-hmm. Naomi, are you seeing?
Do you mind if I jump in?
Oh yeah, go for it.
I think there's just one more piece here, even in terms of evaluating the role of the office. So what we're seeing from our data is that 20% of people want to go into the office for individual focused work. 80% want to go to build camaraderie and develop social connection with their teammates. And so it's also really important for leaders to think about what is the role of my office and how do I design my offices to reflect what people need and what the organization needs today, as well as months from now. And we haven't really talked about that piece, but I think it's really important for us to really check that the office is still important. It's just a question of what the purpose it serves within a company.
I love that point. And I think a lot of these tools that can be used that are video based around the working together and collaboration, I'm seeing a lot of these tooling shift into social. So the same tools that might be used for an all hands or a team retrospective are now being used for the virtual happy hour and getting together and doing a cooking class or whatnot. So a lot of the team building and culture building that's really necessary right now. The same tooling is being used for both. So those lines have blurred, and the whole stack of technology that companies need are just finding use cases across social and professional. A few other points around your question around kind of that sense of face time and how do we make sure it's an equal playing field. I'm seeing a big shift in spend towards just learning and development, and a lot of tooling around the employee experience, around internal mobility, career pathing, mentorship. There's just no shortage of startups right now that are speaking to the head of people to make sure that the talent is feeling fulfilled, is continuously learning and progressing. One company, Flux, focuses on internal mobility and career pathing, and what they found is a lot of the research around certain folks feel like they need to check 95% of the boxes in a role before they're capable and before they raise their hand. But if you actually just shine a light on the talent within the organization that might not be so quick to raise their hand or feels like they're a bit in the background because they're trying to balance 2 young kids at home. I'm in the same boat, Sheila. While doing their job and they're working odd hours, shine a light on the talent based on their skill set, their abilities, the work they've done, where they were before this, their current job, and say, wait, that person actually has the capabilities and skill set to really thrive in that other role. They may not have thought about it, they may not have raised their hand for it, but how can we shine a light on the talent everywhere in the organization, regardless of style and schedule and hours in the office, and make sure that we're developing employees and putting the right people in the right roles. People are they're too quick to leave a job as soon as they feel like they've maxed out in growth or don't like their boss, or for some reason or another, it's so much easier to look outside of an organization. So it's the duty of companies now to really look inward and say, how do I retain employees most successfully?
Mm-hmm. Allison, do you mind if I also jump in on something?
Yeah,
but something that Sheila said about the workplace, as I mentioned, I lead the real estate and workplace team. And during the course of this last 18 months, we've actually taken the opportunity to completely redesign our workspaces, knowing that, it's easier to do because no one was in them. But, recognizing that people would want to use the spaces differently coming back into the offices. We call them Agile Workspaces, but we didn't want, because people are going to be splitting their time, that where people used to have team locations, we didn't want it to feel barren, of a couple, since they were, not everyone might be coming on the same days, and that way we were a lot of wasted space, if you will. So we took away assigned seating. We put a lot more focus space, like library type spaces and separate, individual areas for focus work, because we did find people wanted to do that. And then even more social spaces, people that just can come in and collaborate, either work-wise or just to get to know a new team member or things like that. But by not having all of the assigned seating, we were able to just get rid of a lot of those desks and just use our spaces more differently. So again, we haven't really had a chance to try it out yet, so we'll see how it works. But we would just make our spaces more flexible to meet the needs of how people want to use offices going forward.
Yeah, I think the office is it'll be so interesting to just see how offices transform and how they are going to look a year from now, because I think they will look very different. I'd love to talk a little bit more about best practices around meetings. I know that a lot of companies are doing that with the webcam. Everyone has their webcam on. I know that some have talked about how to make sure a mini meeting doesn't happen after the meeting ends, excluding people who were tuning in remotely. Is there anything else that you're thinking about in terms of making sure that meetings stay inclusive when dealing with remote workers and in-office workers. Jennifer.
Yeah, now there's I think a question as well about this that I can address. For us, it's also around people working in different time zones. And one of our big meeting protocols that we're really pushing is, if you need to have a meeting, if it's one of those reasons that we've established that you have to have a meeting, you have to have the agenda. Everyone knows in advance what the meeting's about. We were hearing stories before we started down this path from people who were like in Australia office, getting up at 3:00 in the morning on a Saturday to attend a meeting that they might need to listen to, and they weren't quite sure, but they were scared they were going to miss something good. But we didn't want people doing that. We want people to make conscious choices about what is this meeting going to be, what's the purpose of it, and then sending notes afterwards is something that is part of the protocol. So if you're going to have a meeting, you have to have an agenda, you have to have a note taker, and you're responsible for sending out the notes afterwards to share out for anyone who can't join. But if you're going to have a meeting and you have cross time zones, we have a guide of, if you have people joining from these different time zones, these are the best times to schedule it that's most equitable for everyone. And if you have a situation where you have a recurring meeting of a global team that you really just can't find a time that's equitable for everybody, you do the rotation. So one time you meet, one time a month. Someone's having the meeting at 7, someone's having the meeting at 2, someone's having the meeting their late night, and then the next month you kind of keep rotating. So it's only every 3 months or so that you'd end up really early or you'd end up kind of late. But everyone, it feels like it shares the load, versus before, frankly, it was always San Francisco time and everyone else had to flex. And so that's been a huge culture shift for us to drive that kind of sharing of that. If you're going to have a meeting, have a high bar for a meeting. But if you're going to do it, make sure that it's inclusive of time zones and you're following those guidelines around if you're in office and not in office. This is how we're handling it.
I love that answer, because we just got a question from YouTube. Somebody's asking, where I work, we've got people working in Europe and on the West Coast of the US. How important is it to keep people with large time zone differences like that interacting or working closely together? What are you seeing with regard to that, Sheila?
Yeah, I agree with what Jennifer just said. A tactical piece is thinking about how your teams are collaborating in different ways. So oftentimes in Slack, someone asks a question, and then a bunch of people swarm and respond. And then by the time someone in London wakes up, like everything's been resolved and they haven't necessarily had a chance to contribute. So there's an opportunity, even when posing a question or posing a discussion, to time box it and say, would love to get everyone's responses by 9 p.m. Pacific tomorrow, so that people across time zones have the opportunity to participate. We've also adopted a practice called brain writing rather than brainstorming. I am a self-proclaimed horrible brainstormer, and I always found brainstorms really stressful to think of that really good idea on the spot. And with brain writing, what we do is we put a bunch of ideas and prompts in a Google Doc, and people can swarm when they can, with ideas, questions, additions, edits. And then the leader of the brain write can consolidate all of the ideas and inputs and then have a conversation about it within Slack. And the beauty of that is that natural introverts have an opportunity to pipe in, and it's not necessarily ideation dominated by the extroverts and the most vocal people. Everyone feels like they can be a part of the overall process. And that helps across time zones as well, from our experience.
Yeah. I'm also interested in how perks are going to remain equitable in a hybrid world. It seems inevitable that there are certain things that people will have access to in the office, whether that's meals or even on-site childcare and things like that. Are there ways for companies to try to make this equitable for remote workers, or is remote work itself just the perk? How does Twitter think about this, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think, probably 3 or 4 years ago, we thought remote work itself is a perk. So don't ask for anything else because we're letting you work remote, because, we had this mentality that we did at Twitter, kind of had this mentality that like, you should just be happy about being able to do that. We've evolved thank goodness, to that's just another way of working, just another type of work. And we actually are doing a review right now because we changed a lot of our benefits during COVID to increase mental health and wellness support and do things differently. Like, before a gym, you might have be able to use our wellness for a gym membership, but not to have a Peloton at home. And now, we're supporting things like equipment at home that we wouldn't have done before. We give everybody a productivity allowance to set up their work from home, because we assume at some point everyone will probably work from home, even if it's just a few days a week. So everyone's able to do that. We don't dictate what they should have. We give them training on setting up an ergonomic desk and all of that. But they may have things already, so we don't want to force them to spend their money on certain things. But we give them kind of a checklist of things to be looking at. And the way we're thinking about food, because, we've always had, great food in our offices, and we never had some of the perks that some of the other bigger tech companies had. But we definitely had some things that kept people in the office and supported them, coming in and getting things done. And certainly food was one of the big draws. And, we thought it for a little while about, so we've got to find a way to give everyone food at home too. And, then we said, maybe we don't have to have the exact same perks in the office that we do at home, just have a parity of experience. And, what are the things that challenge you at home that you need help with? And let's support that. And what are the things that may you have challenge with if you're commuting and, giving them meals so they don't have to spend their time commuting and running out, in the morning and in the middle of the day to try to find food. So we're trying to solve what are we solving for versus just making everything equal. And we're still kind of going through that process now of sorting that out. But it's giving, the way I think we're thinking about it is giving people a lot of flexibility, like giving people a budget for benefits and letting them pick and choose the things that matter most to them, versus kind of, there'll be some things obviously that we'll give everybody around healthcare, et cetera. But some of these other things, some people could care less about having having the food part and would really lean in more to commuting help, that kind of thing. So we're trying to put flexibility and choice in their hands, just like we are about where they work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're seeing those trends too around just optionality and giving people more of a budget, and then maybe a set of tools or sort of partners that they can spend that budget across. I think it's really important to make it work for individual employees and for them to feel like they have some flexibility. I remember when I was on the operating side before moving into venture, I was interviewing with a company that said, "Oh, our big perk is we offer dinner every night." And I was like, I've got a baby at home. Like, that's not a perk to me. That's such a signal of the culture. And so I think knowing that might be fantastic for somebody that's single and, 23 and really like their connective tissue at the workplace is their social outlet. It doesn't fit for every demo. And so having that selection of options so people can really make it work for them is so important right now.
Mm-hmm. So we have about 3 minutes left. I would love to hear from each of you. What has been the most helpful thing that you or another leader at your organization has done in managing a remote or hybrid team? We can start with Jennifer.
I would say, and it's something we adopted early on in even deciding what to do around the pandemic in terms of, do we send everybody home or how do we think about it? And it's just putting the employee first. We put the employee and the employee, their wellness, their health, their experience at the top of everything. We canceled performance ratings last year. We changed a lot of our benefits. We did a lot of things because we just said we are going to first and foremost care for our employees. And it doesn't mean we're still not getting work done, and it doesn't mean don't want to be productive. But we think investing in our people and making sure that they have what they need first and foremost does have tons of benefits on everything we're trying to achieve, but it's our true north, and it's our consistent true north, and it helps guide us. And making that decision as a leadership team up front and just being consistent with that has been really helpful, because we just knew where we were going and what we were about.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Sheila?
I think that leading with vulnerability is something that I've tried to do myself, but I've also really admired among our executive team and my peers at Slack. I don't feel like we talked enough about mental health pre-pandemic, and it's wonderful that leaders are now speaking up about mental health and investing in that area, because people need it right now, they need it in the future, and it's an important topic to continue to discuss from the leadership level. So I'd love to see more of that.
Oh, maybe Naomi can close us out.
I think similar, it's bringing your full self to work and just being direct about, I can't make that meeting. I gotta go to my kid's soccer game, or for me, I had a baby a few months ago, a COVID baby, and for me, the lines blurred very quickly because of maternity leave and still kind of staying afloat with some things with work, and having my partner say, "You're working too much. Get off Slack, get off email." So I think just letting people kind of be clear on where they have priorities at home. And I think when a manager is direct about those and open about those, it flows through to the rest of the organization. So instead of sort of secretly doing the things you need to do personally, making those known so everyone can follow suit.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again. This has been a great conversation. Wish we could talk longer, but really appreciate all the ideas, and hope this was helpful to our viewers. So thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.